When looking at storage, there's the hierarchy of a storage account, and within that, we want to take a look at discrete types of storage of specific types of objects. This is going to introduce block blobs in all of its glory. My name is Bob Tickleman. I'm happy to be your guide for this exploration of blob storage. Let's get into it. You must have a storage account configured first to be able to store blobs inside of it. In another recording, we covered the storage account creation and the different characteristics it has. We're now going to take a closer look at blobs specifically as one of the storage types of information inside of that storage account. We're going to show you what a blob is, how they get hierarchically structured, different tiers that you can work with, and work with a thing called lifecycle management to manage the cost of the blob over a long period of time to optimize its performance and cost performance. Blobs, as a modern way to store unstructured data, is a general term to use for storing images, EXEs, DLLs, Word files, Excel documents as a blob. One of the main differences is the way it's accessed. It's accessed over the HTTP or HTTPS protocol. The other thing is the hierarchical structure in which it's stored. It is stored in a storage account into a container. Now, this name we've struggled with over time. We originally called it blob storage, and people would complain, said you can't nest a blob inside of a blob. So we changed the name to containers. And then all the people, if you're familiar with application deployment and things like Docker containers, the container people got mad and said you can't call it a container, because that's where we run our code. So you might hear names like blob container storage or container blob storage. So all of them mean roughly the same things, but we're going to use the term containers. The thing with the containers, it can't be nested. You can't nest a container inside of a container to put blobs in them. They're a flat structure in the storage account, and you're seeing that here. You can have multiple containers in the storage account to separate objects or the blobs that are within them. And we then have controls for access to govern who can access them and slightly different configurations. But you have this hierarchical structure, the storage account in containers. You then have the blobs you're working with. They've also added a feature that is very similar to what you would have in file shares. We do have the capability of building a folder structure inside, but it's a virtual folder system. It's not as rigid as what you would have had when you were looking at the traditional file shares, where you had a C drive, and below the C drive you had a data directory, and below the data directory you had an HR folder and maybe a payroll folder. That structure, it looks like that, but it's really a facade that they put up. It's a flat structure inside of the containers themselves. One of the benefits of the container storage is its speed and access and the size of files that you're working with. So you're going to be able to create a container. I'll be doing this in a live demonstration. And then you control at the container level. Part of it is an access control that you have, but also the ability to determine how it's accessible. Is it publicly available? Is it privately available? Or is it available anonymously? So we have different public access levels for the container itself that you could set and then work with the objects inside of it specifically. And again, I'll be doing this as a live demo in a bit. Another term that we talked a bit about in the creation of a storage account. At the time you create a storage account that has blob storage in it, you pick a default value in which the blobs will be stored unless you tell it differently. And I'll do this in the live demo as well. If I put an object in and it's identified as a hot tier, it's going to then be able to be available as a hot resource. Now, people often, I say, misunderstand what this means. Hot, cool, and cold will determine the access tier from a performance perspective, but it has an inverse relationship between cost and that performance. So if you put it in hot, it's going to be faster, but it's potentially going to cost you more to store the data. Again, in the live demonstration, I want to prove that this may not always be your interpretation. Yes, hot storage is more than cool, but the access of that information is also going to have differences in cost. And I'm going to give you some examples that if you're accessing a document or a blob frequently, it actually could be cheaper to store it in hot storage as opposed to cold. So if you've read anything or you've heard through the vines or any of your colleagues are telling you that, oh, hot's more expensive than cool, that's only a part truth. You've also got to look at how often are those objects being accessed. So I'll be doing that as a demonstration. So you have a default, and you're seeing it here as inferred. So if an object gets copied in and it's inferred, it means that it inherited that attribute based on the storage account. And here's a bit of a gotcha. If you have an inferred value and you change the default configuration of the storage account, all the objects that were inferred as hot in this case would change to the new access tier from the new configuration of the storage account. So if you moved it from hot to cool, all of those inferred would have been moved to cool as well. If you put it in and define what you want, so in a hot by default, you could put it in as cool, it will always be cool until you change it. Now this can be done manually or it can be done programmatically. I mentioned that you can actually manage the life cycle of the storage of that information. You can take objects that are maybe accessed infrequently, because remember we said storing something in hot by default might be great if you're using it a lot, but if you're not, you may want to move it to a different access tier to get the cost savings of the lower storage, because you're not going to incur the higher access charges. One of the examples I'll give you, and it's just a rough estimate, to access an object in cool storage versus hot is twice as expensive. So having it in hot was more expensive to store, but very cheap to access. But you move it to cool storage, it's way cheaper to store, but to access it costs you twice as much. So if you put it into cool thinking it's going to be cheaper to store, but you access it a whole bunch at double the access charges, it's going to have a big impact on you. So we can actually have the system lifecycle manage that says, if this object hasn't been used or accessed over a period of time, maybe I want you to automatically move it to a lower tier. And if it hasn't been used for even a longer period of time, move it to yet a lower, more cost-effective tier. So lifecycle management is a feature that you could then program, but be careful as you do this. As I said, it's not always going to yield the specific results you're working with. What I want to do is give you an example of, you want to be a bit careful to understand what this actually entails, moving something from hot to cool, because it may not yield the results you're looking for. What some people will do is think, I'm going to keep it as cool to get the lower storage charges, and I'm going to use it, I'm going to move it into hot, I'll use it, and then I'll move it back to cool. You're going to end up being surprised with that result. When you take a look at a billing cycle, and I'm just going to use some samples of 30 days, and this is where those numbers of 30, 60, and 90 come from. They really don't have any strong recommendations. Let's say that your billing cycle starts at the 1st of the month and it ends at the 30th. And I'm going to say every month that I have has 30 days, just for ease of use. If you store an object as hot at the 1st of the month, and then you move it to cool, as you go at the end of the month, you will be billed at the highest tier in that billing period. So the bill will come in as a hot. If it's still cool for the next billing cycle, only at the second one will you get the reduced cost based around an entire billing cycle in cool. But let's say it goes cool all the way through to not the end of the month. It falls just short, and then you move it back to hot, and then back to cool for that period of time. You will actually be billed as hot in that billing cycle. So be careful. Moving files around trying to game the system is probably not going to yield the results that you're looking for. And that's where those numbers of 30, 60, and 90, if it hasn't changed in 30 days, you do have to be a bit careful, because if it hasn't changed in 30 days, you have to clear an entire billing cycle before you get that benefit. So yes, you've got it as hot, it's changed to cool, you're not going to get that benefit in the first billing cycle, but in the next one, you might get it from there. So be careful with that value. I mentioned in another recording the ability in the storage account to create a region pair. A region pair in a storage account takes your information and, managed by Microsoft, replicates that to the region pair selected by Microsoft. Example that I always use is US East is paired with US West. And so you're going to have your 3 copies in US East, whichever way you have, LRS or ZRS, and they're going to be then copied to a data center someplace in US West. If for whatever reason the network drops or fails, Microsoft will fail that over for you. That is within the sovereign region for data domicile requirements. It will never go outside of the geographic authoritative region that data is stored in the primary region. But it doesn't mean that you can't replicate it to other locations, and I alluded to that in that other recording. So within a storage account that is a regionally based unit of replication, let's say it was GZRS. That's the global geo-redundant. So this is in, say, US East, and its region pair is US West. So you're going to have this blob1.txt. You're also going to have blob1.txt in the US West region. And that's going to be done through the region pairing replication. But it doesn't mean that you can't take a container and then you manually configure whatever region that you want it to be replicated in an asynchronous model. Remember that the 3 copies are synchronously in the region and then async to the other region. Here we have an async replication that could go to various regions done on a per container basis inside of the storage account. Now I could also have blob1 replicated to region 3 here, but it's done on a per container basis, and you can replicate it to many other regions that are globally based that you're working with. As many cases, you want to put the data as close to the region as possible. So let's go do a demonstration of some of these characteristics. So I want to do a demonstration of the creation of a storage account. I'm going to do this as a fairly broad stroke. Some of the more detailed components will be covered in another module and its recording and demonstration. What we always start with is looking for the resource. I'm doing this in the portal. We've seen other ways to do this. I'm going to find in Storage Center. I'm going to add a new account. I'm going to create this account. And there's certain attributes. Now you remember your storage account name has to be globally unique. And you see as I'm typing this, it's saying that name isn't available. It's already taken. So I have to make modifications to make it globally unique. And you'll see why in a bit. We then pick the region that we want to work with. And in another recording, I'll be showing you where the region differences might come along. I'm now looking at some of the storage account options that you're working with, some of its advanced features for the different types of storage that we're working with. I'm actually getting into networking. I'm going to disable this feature. I want to show you how to enable it later on. And what it will do is it'll give me access. So the way it's set up right now is if I was administering the actual storage account, I wouldn't be able to access it, and I'll show you how I fix that. Here are some of the data protection values for soft deletes of the containers, the blobs. These encryption keys, the default is to use a Microsoft encrypted key. You can bring your own keys now if you wanted to, if you have that security requirement. So I'm just going to create the storage account. Just takes a second. They may have sped this up a little bit in editing, but you'll see this come up. Now I'm going to go into the storage account. And I want to change some of the attributes. The first one I want to get into is that networking one. Remember, I disabled network access, and I'm now going to turn this on. So if I've been doing other administration in here, it would have popped up with an error message saying you don't have permissions to do this. So I'm going to enable network access, and I'm going to enable it for the IP address that I'm currently coming from. So I'm going to add that address, it finds it, and it's going to put it into an allow list that would allow me to administer the resources graphically. I'm going to get into some data management. And it was set up as a geo-redundant storage account, and you can see with the region pairs there. I could change that if I want after the fact. I'm now going to add a container, a data container, and I'm going to load an object up into that container. And now what I want to do is to grab the URL to access the actual object. Paste that into a browser. And what it's going to see, I'll zoom in here in just a second, you should see the URL that is being used to access this object. It's the storage account name, .blob.core.windows.net. We showed you the 4 different types. It could be files. and then you get /data, and then / the name of the object itself. Great, let's return back to the presentation. So we saw that blobs, as a way to store information, have a whole bunch of information. In another recording, we talked about how you create a storage account to hold the blobs. In this recording, we're taking a look at how do I configure the actual blobs that live in there. And just from a configuration perspective, there's quite a bit. We looked at the access tiers that you're working with. We looked at the lifecycle management features. In other recordings, we're going to actually show you the security and access that you have. So you now have one part of this modern method to store and retrieve information in an unstructured data that is going to be used at the core of all your data sources. Thanks for joining us for this session. To continue your learning, watch other videos in the course or explore more on Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/learn.